7 years ago, I went off the grid, deleting my Snapchat, Twitter, and most painfully, my Instagram. But now I'm back. Actually, it's been almost a year since I've been back, and contrary to what you might be thinking, it's actually been feeling pretty good. So for more context on the parameters of my initial social media detox when I first kicked it off 7 years ago, I kept my Facebook because at the time I still needed it for college and housing groups, but after I graduated 5 years ago, I deleted that too. I also still had a few other semi-active accounts on different sites too, but they weren't problematic for me because they felt pretty disconnected from my actual social life. And I wouldn't really spend that much time on them anyway. So for the most part, your boy was a ghost. And according to everyone, this was supposedly the move. The thing that everyone talks about wanting to do one day. To be that cool and mysterious person that doesn't get FOMO. To be more present and to focus on higher quality relationships instead of surface level ones. So why then, after 7 years of fully soaking up those supposed benefits, did I get back on the grid by re-downloading my Instagram, realizing that maybe everyone was wrong? I do think that it can be a pretty complicated topic that comes with trade-offs with any approach that you take. And I want to note the disclaimer that I don't think social media itself is inherently amazing or horrible, but that it depends on one's own relationship with it, and that it's important for people to be intentional with its use, just like they equally should be intentional with any other means of instant gratification. But I've been back on Instagram for a year now and haven't really seen all of my perspectives on the topic talked about that much when I'd research other people's experiences deleting their socials. So I thought to at least share my thinking around it in case you're also considering ways to adapt your own relationships with social media. So let's jump in. To lay out my thoughts, I'll go over why I first wanted to delete my social media, the pros I experienced from deleting, the cons, and my new relationship to social media now, re-downloading my Instagram and using it in a way where I can still benefit from those pros without dealing with the increasingly heavy weight of the cons. But before diving deeper into this framework, I thought it could be helpful to first share some brief context on the originating story of how social media and tech in general came into my life and what it meant to me depending on the life chapter that I was in. Because I do think that everyone's personal psychology is different, which can influence their relationships to the internet throughout the different stages that they're in. So if you don't mind me getting self-indulgently nostalgic here, let me share my story with you. To overview my personal history with social media and tech, I'll categorize my life chapters by where I was at in school. So elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. Starting from elementary. At this point, I was obviously really young and didn't really know much about the world. But my dad was an engineer, so from an early age, I was always exposed to tech, and even had the privilege of having access to a computer to mess around with, mostly just to play games on. However, my dad also made me a personal website at the time where we'd upload photos of what me and the family were up to for relatives overseas to see and keep in touch with us through, which felt really cool. Super important to also note, but at this age, I also watched Spy Kids for the first time, which was honestly a religious moment for me, making me think that I was destined to be a spy. I was looking at Junie, I saw that we were both equally pretty pale with curly brown hair, not the smoothest of dudes, and I thought, this is it. I'm meant to be a spy. And what I thought was the first step to getting there was having all the cool gadgets that a spy would have. Like Ralph, Junie's pet robot. So I remember being really obsessed with gadgets and getting to open up computers and different types of hardware with my dad, playing around with the pieces, watching him build little spy inventions for me, while also pretending to make stuff myself. As I got older, I eventually expanded on my creative expression through tech by making a MySpace profile and a YouTube channel. At the time with MySpace, you were able to get super intentional and involved with how you would design your profile, which was really inspiring to me. It felt like designing your Igloo and Club Penguin times 10, and I'd always get energized by seeing how my friends would design theirs. And with YouTube, I didn't post anything at this time, but a few friends and I would make different playlists of videos that we liked and would creatively design our pages there too. So from a young age, because I had the privilege of early access to tech and what it could enable you to do, I began associating technology with positive creative expression. And this influenced me a ton into adulthood too, from graduating to UC Berkeley, a college with a huge tech presence, into eventually working in big tech myself today. Next was middle school. I was always a bit of a class clown, and as an only child with divorced parents, I loved expressing myself in as many different ways as I could, since it would get pretty old just trying to entertain one parent at a time nonstop in their different apartments. So now I actually started posting videos to my YouTube channel. And I wasn't the most active or anything, but I made a few skits and other random things. And one of them was even recognized by a YouTube inspiration of mine at the time. Nobody with a massive following or anything like that, maybe just a couple thousand subscribers, if that. But they're really big in the niche community that I was interested in and made a video about. So their comments on my video was super validating. As you'd expect, all the videos I made at that time were pretty embarrassing looking back at now, but they represented a fun time in my life where I began leaning into my creativity. This was also when Facebook started getting popular for kids my age, so I made an account there too. But I mostly just used it to sometimes post photos from hangouts with friends and to occasionally message different crushes I had at school. The latter of which remaining, to this day, a peak feeling of ecstasy that I've since been chasing, but I'm yet to find again. But that's besides the point. Then came high school, and the entire social and extracurricular fabric of campus life became pretty intimately intertwined with social media. And I was kind of loving that too. You'd get unfiltered glimpses into classmates' lives outside of school by maintaining Snapchat streaks. You'd feel like a comedian with the one-liners you'd post on Twitter. But Facebook and Instagram really were the crux of it all, as the most polished, public-facing online platforms that most comprehensively depicted who you were to your classmates at a broader scale. And again, because I was an only child with divorced parents and going to a huge public high school, social media at this time enhanced a sense of camaraderie that I wasn't used to feeling across different grade levels, connecting me with new friends from unique backgrounds I'd meet from classes and extracurriculars, and helping me grow our relationships. I was also leaning even more into my creative expression. I'd have fun wearing new outfits and having little photo shoots with friends in different parts of town, or uniquely promoting the different things I had going on with the organizations I was involved with. And it felt really nice having a space where I could authentically put myself out there to a wider audience of people who knew me well. I'm fully aware that this wasn't the experience for everyone online at this age. It's not like I was a cool kid or anything like that, because I definitely had my fair share of online and in-person bullying moments too. But in general, I think I try to come across as a friendly guy to everyone that just wanted to connect. And I think my sincerity in that showed, because in aggregate, I was lucky enough that the pros of my time online in this period still did outweigh the cons of those bullying moments for me. However, again, I know this isn't the universal experience, and I totally acknowledge the privilege and luck I had in that. But then came college, and I think I started caring a little bit too much about social media's importance as a tool to facilitate camaraderie and expression. Once I graduated high school, I was being introduced to new people who had no context to who I was. So I felt a lot of pressure from my social media to give them all of my background so they could understand me as if we grew up together. Eager to show them the mutual friends and interests that we had so that they could accept me as soon as possible as a relevant potential new friend. But I ended up over-indexing on this too much, and it was hard for me to stop thinking about it. So that's when I decided to take a step back and get off the grid for a bit. Okay, now with my life story out of the way, we can get back to the actual social media detox framework. Firstly, expanding on why I wanted to delete everything. So I referenced this before when discussing how my relationship with social media started changing when I was in college, but the main reason why I deleted everything was because I just couldn't stop overthinking about how I'd be perceived online by others. This expressed itself in a few ways. So firstly, I noticed that I'd care way too much about posting online all the interesting things going on in my life to prove that I was cool. From this, it would just get increasingly hard to just stay present and enjoy myself, because I'd always be thinking that with the more cool things I'd post online, there'd be more new ways I could potentially relate to more people and inevitably get closer to them. With that excessive fixation on how I'd be perceived online came with it a lot of energy towards how my account metrics would look too. At this stage, my profile was still private, and it's not like I was trying to become an influencer or anything, but paying attention to my likes per minute ratio when posting something new, for example, was something I'd notice and give more energy to than I'd want. And related to this was my fixation on wanting cool people to engage with my content because of how I thought it'd make me look. Because again, at this stage in college, I was meeting a lot of new people, and I noticed I'd spend a lot of energy reflecting on what they might think about me when seeing my online presence for the first time, noting the interesting mutuals we had and how they interact with my posts. And it's embarrassing to admit, but because of that, I'd always feel a sting when people who I thought were interesting would unfollow me. Partially because I'd want to keep in contact with them, but another part was selfishly because I thought having a wide network would help me come across as relevant to the maximum amount of people, which I didn't like that I cared about, but at the time I did, and unfollows would shrink that network. So with that, when someone would unfollow me, I'd care so much about it that it felt like I must have been dead to them. And it'd be the same feeling when someone new I'd meet wouldn't want to follow me back. When really, social media just isn't that big of a deal, nor is it an accurate portrayal of real life. So it's something I should have never given any extra energy to ruminate on anyway. In terms of pros I experienced from deleting, this one isn't new and groundbreaking, but a big one was the extra mindfulness that I experienced, which was most significantly felt from the extra peace of mind I had from no longer obsessing over how I was being perceived online. I think there will probably always still be moments in person too when you meet someone new and briefly consider what they might think about you depending on your interactions together. But I don't know if it's because I've gotten older, so the people I'm interacting with are just more mature and polite, or if I'm mostly just interacting with people I've already known for years because it's harder for me to make new friends as an adult, or if I just don't care enough to even put as much thought into thinking about this anymore. But those moments of second guessing how I'm perceived by new people I'd meet are honestly pretty rare these days. I also noticed that in general, without social media, I was spending a bit less time on my phone. But disclaimer here, it's not like I became a monk from this, because I'd still waste a good amount of time online. I just do so differently. For example, when on my phone, I instead started scrolling in ways that I thought could still be beneficial to me, like on LinkedIn, or Blind, or Goodreads. And I'd also be subscribed to a ton of different newsletters that I'd skim when on the train, which did feel healthier, but it's worth noting that it was still dopamine that I was receiving, albeit through more intellectual mediums, and in slightly fewer occasions since those sites weren't as addicting to me as traditional social media. When talking about the aspect of wasting less time online from deleting socials, I saw that people loved talking about how addicting it is to doom scroll, and how that won't be a problem anymore when you delete. But like I said, even without traditional socials, I still saw myself scrolling on other apps. Sometimes I'd literally even find myself doom scrolling out of boredom on my Venmo feed. And this isn't even considering how much time we all waste on the computer without scrolling. Because when on the computer, I'd still waste tons of time taking deep dives on YouTube, building my dream real estate portfolio in Zillow, whatever it may be. So again, I still spent a bit less time online, but definitely wasn't a monk when I didn't have socials. And I think the general narrative on this topic honestly overemphasizes the significance of doom scrolling in particular, when what's really addicting is just the internet in general. Doom scrolling is going to feel like an easy solution to help fill whatever free time you might have to fill, but when you're genuinely bored or just in the mood to procrastinate, it's still pretty easy to kill a ton of time online, even without any scrolling involved. Now to expand on the cons I experienced from deleting that aren't nearly as talked about compared to the pros. First and foremost, I felt less creatively engaged because without the convenience of social media, it was hard for me to express myself as often to as many friends, which led to me to just express myself less in general. I also missed seeing how my friends and acquaintances would creatively express themselves too, which they might have been shy to mention to me in conversation when we'd get together. And seeing my friends' different projects and ideas really inspires me. For some people, this might not be a huge deal. And at first, I kind of just accepted it and positioned my time offline as a time where I just lock in. I was focused on my classes, super involved in extracurriculars, and cared a lot about my professional development. But at my core, I've always thought of myself as a creative, and I knew that I wasn't fully honoring myself. At work just a little while ago, we actually had a leadership coach come in and guide us through an Enneagram personality type exercise. And I ended up being labeled as an Enneagram type 4, also known as the individualist or creative, which is a type that highly values unique personal expression, which made total sense to me. I still always showed up every day as my true authentic self, and I'd always have my own little ways of expressing myself, like by journaling, writing book reviews, making playlists, whatever. But I still felt like I had way more in me that I needed to put out there. And that feeling eventually started taking a real toll on me. It even got to the point where I'd almost regularly have identity crises, where I'd be confronted with feelings of being a watered down version of myself, not respecting who I was meant to be, letting this stockpile of creative energy and ideas inside of me just keep getting buried deeper and deeper until I forget about them, only to be reminded again when watching a movie scene of people pursuing their dreams or something, and then I just start spontaneously crying because it reminded me that I wasn't doing the same, which is wild and something I should definitely talk to a professional about. But after enough of these moments of impromptu crying and external reminders that I need to be doing more, I thought I needed some change, which is the key reason why I'm even making this YouTube video now, because I really miss expressing myself. And shameless plug, if you're interested in seeing other ways I hope to express myself, feel free to subscribe here for reflections around life, career, New York, and other stuff. It would mean a ton. Thank you. But okay, now to the second major con that I experienced, which is that being off of social media diluted my relationships. Some might argue that true friends should still be able to stay in touch without social media being the main cohesive tissue holding them together. But as busy adults, the time and energy we have to share with each other is just way more limited. I'm not even putting the blame on others here either. I'm just as equally part of the problem because I'm the one with less bandwidth to reach out and stay in touch with everyone as often as I'd like to be. I don't think I've been a bad friend per se, but I recognize that throughout my life, I was lucky to have come across lots of interesting people while I was in different life stages who I still regularly think about, but haven't been in touch with for a while. So we might have only chatted a few times in the past or were loose acquaintances, but they're still a part of my life story and I want to honor that, which can be hard to do with all the different people that you meet throughout your life. And yes, I know that if I wanted to make it a top priority, I probably could, but that would be a trade-off I'd have to make at the expense of other non-social categories of my life. And with the amount of energy I knew I wanted to continue putting in those other life areas, I knew that'd be challenging, especially since there was an easier solution, which was just re-downloading my social media and having a healthier approach to using it. The older we get, there are just so many more things taking time away from us. And even if you're super intentional, it's still hard to consistently connect with everyone that you know and want to stay in touch with, while also maintaining a well-balanced life. At least it was for me. Even with my closer friends, we check in every once in a while, but sometimes I just be curious about the nonsense that's going on in their heads throughout the week. But I can't just text everybody and ask them to spam me a diary of what they've been up to. Firstly, because they might be too shy to do that. And secondly, because I don't even know if I'd have the bandwidth to then sustain all those different text threads on a regular basis. Just seeing the memes that my old friends who I might not have talked to in ages would post on their stories, for example, makes me really happy. Realizing that I have friends that share the same niche sense of humor than I do, which makes the world feel a bit smaller to me. I even went through a phase while I was off the grid where I thought it'd be nice to send handwritten letters to like 30 friends across the country to show that I'm still thinking about them. But like only a few ended up writing back, which again, I totally understand because it takes so much effort and these days everyone has less time and is honestly just trying to survive. And then there are new friendships where you might meet someone and exchange numbers, but not feel fully comfortable enough yet to casually text them. Especially if you had a super quick in-person exchange and don't really know each other that well yet, but think they might be someone you want to get closer to. With social media, at least, you can gradually and organically grow the bud of that relationship to get it to the point where you can be more casually texting. But without that enabler, for me, it was a bit harder to escalate those relationships without coming across possibly as needy. But that just might be a me problem because I'm overthinking and coming up with excuses for not putting myself out there enough, and that I actually wouldn't be needy if I reached out to more people first. So I actually don't fully know about that one. And the real nail in the coffin here is the implication that being an online ghost has in the early stages of dating someone new. There's all these memes where people want to date someone who has no social media because they think it's hot that they have the self-control not to care about external validation. But I think in their heads, they want to date someone they already know well and are attracted to that doesn't have social media. Partially because it's attractive that they don't care about external validation, sure. But I'm sure it's also partially because they think that they'd be safer since their partners won't be sliding into strangers' DMs and vice versa, or posting thirst traps. That's just my own hot take. In reality, when you meet someone new who has super limited context to who you are, especially a potential dating prospect who wants to make sure you're not a psycho, unless you have a ton of mutual friends and history together, it does make it a bit harder to sell yourself in the beginning. I'm not saying it's impossible, but when there's seemingly unlimited dating options these days, especially with dating apps and if you live in a big city like I do in New York, lots of people just feel like there's less skin in the game without blending your online social lives, and an extra potential obstacle if you have no digital footprint, which makes it harder for you to stay top of mind enough to even schedule that first date with some people. But again, this could totally just be a me problem where I'm trying to cope for having it tough out here with the ladies, so I don't know. Okay, and here's how I'm thinking about approaching my relationship to social media now, after the 7-year break. So first and foremost, I honestly just care a lot less about what people think about me, both online and in person. And I think that just comes with having grown up a bit, seeing all the people that I grew up with follow their own unique paths, and honestly just being more focused as an adult on like daily survival than on what some random people I don't even care about that much think about me. Obviously, I still have moments of overthinking where I might get in my head if I said something stupid or if someone thinks I'm annoying, which I think is natural. But in general, enough time has passed and I've had enough external validation for me to have a fairly strong sense of the value that I bring to the table and of who my true friends are. I think when you're younger, it's easier for you to second guess your identity, what you're capable of, your strengths, etc. But I'm thankful that over the past few years, I've worked hard enough and put myself out there enough that I received sufficient external signal to give me a good understanding of who I am outside of what I just tell myself. However, like I said, I do still occasionally overthink, so it's important for me to continue remembering that these apps really aren't real life and that I shouldn't give online social dynamics more power and energy than they deserve. And lastly, I think from spending enough time offline and enjoying the beauty of a relatively more present day-to-day, I also still want to proactively try to remain mindful despite having social media. And this could be expressed as simply as just trying to stay present during liminal periods throughout the day, instead of instinctively going to check my phone. This was something I did still occasionally struggle with even when I didn't have social media, but I was still better at it. So when I'm waiting for the train or in an elevator or something, I've been trying harder to just stay present. And while those examples may seem super minor, they still make me feel better throughout the day, which I think has a compounding effect. So that's my framework of where I'm at right now. But I should also caveat that it's totally possible that after some time I might change my approach or even just delete everything altogether again. So we'll just see how it goes. But at least at this moment, that's what my mental model has been looking like. And because I tend to iterate on things pretty often, I'd love to hear about your own relationships to social media. And if there's anything you might disagree with that I said, because that could help with my own thinking and reflection as well. Would also love to hear about your own experiences growing up online if you did, because it always makes me nostalgic reflecting on those times too. But that's all I have for now. Thanks for tuning in to listen to me ramble, and I hope that some of my thoughts could have at least been a little helpful to you in your own journeys with social media. Till next time.